Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. My name is Ryan Berg. I'm the director of the Americas program here at the Center. It's my great pleasure to welcome you this morning to the Center for an all-day conference on cultivating competitiveness, positioning North America as a strategic agricultural bloc. We have an excellent day of programming ahead. There's enough to keep you occupied really for the entire day. 5 total panels, a networking lunch, and a closing cocktail reception. It's our hope that you'll stay with us throughout the day for all of this programming. We've been thinking about, conceptualizing, and planning this conference since late last year. As we continued the planning, the conference grew more and more ambitious, consonant with our ambitions for the North American region. It's been a heavy lift, but we couldn't have done this without partners and sponsors. I want to start by thanking the Corn Refiners Association, John and Christy. Thanks for everything that you've done to make this possible. I also want to thank our other partners in this endeavor. Your support has been key to making this event what it is. Corteva, the American Farm Bureau, Bio, Constellation Brands, and Driscoll's. We are indeed very grateful. At CSIS, we believe that security, both economic and physical, starts here at home in North America. It's why we launched the USMCA Strategic Initiative last year, a program to analyze and assess policies and strategies that enhance and maximize the potential of the region that we all call home. Simply put, we want to make North America the best region in the world to live. Today's conference fits squarely within this set of programming. After all, what could be more fundamental to making North America the best place to live than the security, the health, and the dynamism of the region's food systems? The complementarity and integration of its agricultural markets, and the abundance of its crop yields, sufficient to feed large swaths of the world. We fully admit, however, that these are challenging times for North America. For this reason, the running theme of today's conference, the through line, if you will, of all 5 panels, is strengthening our region's competitiveness. As I think will become clear over the course of the day, competitiveness is more than a mindset. It's a set of policies, strategies, technologies, and innovations that we can pursue together. And we think that competitiveness is a goal that all 3 countries can agree upon as a region. In order to break down the idea of North American agricultural competitiveness, we've organized today's programming into 5 panels. Every panel has a representative from each North American country. What follows my remarks will be our plenary panel on charting North American prosperity through food and agriculture. After the plenary panel, we'll break for our networking lunch, which will take place buffet style right here in the CSIS atrium, just outside of this auditorium. In the afternoon, we'll return at 1:30 for more programming. At that time, we will have what we call breakout sessions, 2 panels going at the same time. This includes panels on the fruits of an integrated North American market and North American agricultural competitiveness in an era of great power competition. From 2:30 to 3, we'll have a coffee break again back in the atrium. And at 3 p.m., we'll have our last breakout session, 2 panels on addressing the challenges of transportation and logistics and emerging technologies and agricultural innovation. We hope that this will be enough intellectual pabulum to keep you with us for the entire day. The day's activities will conclude by returning to the CSIS atrium for a cocktail reception, because we believe that as North Americans, we can still toast and be merry. In fact, it's very much encouraged. So with that, please join me in welcoming the speakers for the plenary panel to the stage to discuss charting North American prosperity through food and agriculture. Thank you very much. North America is one of the only regions of the world that produces more food than it consumes, a critical advantage as geopolitical tensions, water scarcity, and changing climate make the agricultural sector vulnerable to market fluctuations. The 3 countries comprising North America also possess unique synergies, such as differing growing seasons and climates, which allow for year-round availability of fresh produce. Canada, for example, has vast grain and oilseed production. The United States has very diversified crop and livestock systems, and Mexico has a rich variety of fruits and vegetables that thrive in its warmer climates. Our plenary panel this morning will highlight the strengths of our integrated market and discuss the unique factors that make North America a particularly strategic trading bloc, with a focus on increasing this region's global agricultural competitiveness. I will now introduce our excellent panelists for this session. Directly to my left is Francis Drouin, who served as a Liberal Member of Parliament for Glengarry, Prescott and Russell from 2015 to 2025, where he was known for his active engagement in committee work and his focus on agriculture and official languages. He was appointed Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food in 2021 and served on several key committees, including Agriculture and Agri-Food, Official Languages, Government Operations and Estimates, and the Special Committee on the COVID-19 pandemic. He did not seek re-election in 2025, which has allowed him to be with us here today at CSIS. Next, joining us from Mexico City is Dr. Luis Rosendo Gutierrez Romano, who is Mexico's Undersecretary of Foreign Trade. He brings a deep experience at the intersection of political economy, trade, and public finance. Luis Rosendo, thanks so much for being here with us virtually. We understand that the demands of the job meant that you had to go back early yesterday, but we're lucky to have you here by Zoom. Luis Rosendo has held senior roles across Mexico's federal government, including at the Ministry of Trade and Industry, the Ministry of Finance, and the Mexican Social Security Institute. He served as Deputy Director General for Planning and Budgeting at the Ministry of the Interior and as Treasurer of Mexico City. He has also worked with the United Nations ECLAC on development finance. And lastly, we have Ambassador Darcy Vetter. She is a global public policy leader with extensive experience at the intersection of agriculture, sustainability, and international trade. She has held senior roles across the U.S. government, the private sector, and nonprofits, including serving as Chief Agricultural Negotiator at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, where she led major trade agreements with partners. At USDA, she oversaw the Foreign Agricultural Service, expanding global market access for U.S. agriculture and managing international food assistance efforts. Earlier in her career, she worked on trade legislation as a staffer on the Senate Finance Committee. So as you can see, we have a superlative panel to discuss these issues this morning. I've asked each one of our speakers to prepare about 10 minutes or so of opening remarks. Then we'll move into a moderated portion of the discussion. And of course, at the very end, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. One last note on questions from the audience. If you do have a question, you see above me, there's the QR code. You can scan the QR code, you can type in your question. Those will filter to us and we'll be able to read them off during the Q&A portion of the panel. Alternatively, you can go to the event website. There's a little green button, at least it used to be green. It says Ask Live Questions. You can click on that. It'll take you to the same spot as the QR code. Input your question there. We'll read them off during the Q&A portion of this morning's event. So with that, I'd like to start with opening remarks. Francis, please, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much for hosting us today, and I want to thank the Center for Strategic and International Studies for doing this. I got to say, as a Canadian, when I see CSIS, for us, it's the equivalence of our intelligence agency in the U.S. So it was a bit bizarre, but I do want to recognize the work that you guys have done, especially with Canada and promoting this event at such a crucial time. I thought I'd give a bit of a lay of the land, no pun intended, but the lay of the land in Canada on how we do ag and from east to the west coast, where obviously the climate obliges different kinds of agriculture. So in Atlantic Canada, for instance, we mostly focus on apples and berries and potatoes. Yes, we do have cattle farmers down there, but it's not a significant presence as it would be in Alberta. Quebec, as you would know, maple syrup is their a major export to the U.S. And Ontario, we've got I call it corn. It's corn and soybean land over there. But in the eastern and southwestern Ontario, we're mostly focused on that type of grains. But we do have a lot of greenhouses in southwestern Ontario. And then when we move to Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, it's mostly canola, lots of cattle that we produce in the west, in Alberta especially. And then once you get to BC on the west coast, again because of climate, they're mostly focused on berries and apples and whatnot. So and obviously agriculture is an important part of that. But this is all to say that in Canada, we export, our major customer obviously is the US. And that's not to say that the US is simply buying from Canada, but I want to talk more about the integration of both of our economies. And sometimes we do get pressure back home to say, well, how come we don't buy as much from the West, or the East doesn't buy as much from the East, the West, or the East doesn't buy as much from the West? And because we're more integrated North and South. So if I talk about cattle, for instance, a cow-calf operation will send, either we buy from the US, they come to our feedlots, and then they're shipped back to the US for further processing. And then for some reason, cattle they do move, but they don't like to move north of the Great Lakes. They tend to move more south of the Great Lakes, and we'll buy back from the US. And it's the same thing for the hog industry. I mean, I know there's some people in the hog industry here, in the cattle industry. I do want to give a shout out to my Canadian colleagues over there. But they are so much integrated. That north-south relationship is so integrated and so important to Canada and to the U.S., I would argue, that USMCA modernized the agreement. And those relationships, I certainly believe, predate any free trade agreements. Those relationships, if you talk to our decades and decades and decades ago, whether if they're a successful succession, their grandfathers could have been exchanging with our U.S. counterparts dating back to when we did have tariffs at the time. So I think moving forward to today, the opportunities that we have, USMCA is not only a free trade agreement, but I certainly believe that it's a food security issue for North America. Without that USMCA, we're also interdependent on one another, and obviously Canada, because of our climate, in wintertime, while scientists haven't figured out yet how to grow potatoes in the winter, or corn, so we are dependent on either the U.S. or Mexico for tomatoes. Even though we do have greenhouses and whatnot, it's still not enough for us to be self-sustained. So that's why I say the USMCA is it's a question of food security for Canada. Let's see here. I do, looking at the future, I am encouraged by what the last trade agreement, the update that was done, and especially when we're looking at biotechnology and whether or not we're talking about gene editing. I think those are important issues as we move forward, and as farmers face all kinds of crises. Droughts, whether it's droughts in the western U.S. states, droughts in western Canada, those are issues that affect not only us as a country, but affects North America when we talk about the supply of grains, because grains can be important for feeding in the U.S. or vice versa. So it's important that we have and we give the tools to farmers, and I think there's tremendous opportunities for Canada, U.S., and Mexico to collaborate, and I was happy to see that, and I certainly know that our producers back home were happy to see that particular upgrade in the USMCA. I do want to say that despite sometimes in families we have differences, but I think the great tools that we do have in the USMCA is this dispute resolution mechanisms, and how do we improve that moving forward? And areas of where I think we can improve on certain measures. And I certainly talked about the biotech stuff, which I believe is important, but I see challenges for us in Canada, and I know that it's a challenge for us in the US as well. When we talk about the availability of drugs, the availability of feed additives, and how do we make it easier for industry to ensure that they can have available those particular tools available in a particular marketplace. And certainly science is science, so as a North American bloc, we can promote that science-based approach, and I'm happy to see the work that was done over in the past few years as a North American bloc when we promote North American agriculture, whether it's in Europe or in Asia. a science-based approach, I think, is extremely important. But we, as countries, I think we can improve and do a better job in terms of approving those particular tools that are available to farmers. And that's where I didn't say it's part of the agreement, but how it trickles down, whether it's in the EPA or CFIA or PMRA in Canada, those tools are important to farmers, and the climate is changing fast, and we need to, and science is evolving very quickly, and we need those tools available to farmers. I think I'm going to stop there, but I just want to, I do want to say that this is an important discussion. I look forward to discussing with my panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Francis. We appreciate your opening remarks. I want to go now to Luis Rosendo from Mexico City. Over to you for about 10 minutes of opening remarks.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in this very important event. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much to Ryan Berg, the director of the Americas program at CSIS. Of course, to my friend John Bowdy, president of Corn Refiners Association, and to Juan Cortina, vice president of the CCE in Mexico. As you are talking right now are challenging times for North America. We are living a change of paradigm in not just in the United States, but in all the world. And this change of paradigm, we need to understand that is related to economic security. It is more related to economic security than to prices or competition with the ideas of the Washington Consensus or the ideas of free market. The most important thing right now, especially for North America, is economic security. And to talk about economic security is to talk about agriculture, of course, livestock, and food. So it's really important, this forum, to try to understand this new paradigm and to try to develop a new agenda to continue working in the next future to strengthen our sources of food, not only for humans, but also for livestock in our region, and to try to understand how, at what extent we are dependent on other regions about food for humans and for livestock. So these kind of things are really important right now, and we are discussing in the tables of negotiation about trade. I think that in these negotiations and in this specific issue about economic security of North America, Mexico has a very critical role. Mexico is a critical player for the economic security of North America. Right now, Mexico is exporting to the United States around $48 billion related to beer, for example, the 13%, berries, 9% of our exports, tequila, of course, 7% of our exports, avocados, tomatoes, beef, chilies and peppers, etc. And to Canada, we are exporting around 2 billion, less than 2 billion. We are exporting to Canada avocados, cigarettes, cocoa, mango, tequila, etc. So together, United States and Canada represent about $50 billion of exports. This market is very important market for all North America. But the most important thing, more than the market size, I think, again, is the strength that Mexico has for the region to improve the economic security and the resilience. Mexico, Canada, and United States are very useful among each other to try to improve the resilience levels that we need for possible future crisis or any problem about health that we can develop in the future generations. The COVID experience was very, very important for North America. We lived very hard times with the COVID experience, and it shows that we need to strengthen our economic security of our region. We will continue working since Mexico to try to be a complement for Canada and for the United States. We are good allies and partners, and we agree, especially with the last comment about the controversy solution system that is right now in the USMCA. We need to strengthen these kind of systems to continue working in a very well manner with the best practices with our trade agreement. We believe that we have a very good platform to continue working, not only with agricultural issues or livestock issues, but also with manufacturing. Right now, we are in several meetings and negotiations tables and trying to have zero tariffs for agriculture and livestock. I think that is good news that Canada and Mexico has zero tariffs for these kind of economic activities. And we will continue in the following month very close to United States and Canada, trying to have the best trade agreement in the world and the best conditions for the agriculture providers and the agro industries in North America. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Luis Rosendo. Ambassador Vetter, over to you for about 10 minutes of opening remarks.
So first of all, thank you to you, Ryan, and to CSIS and to my fellow panelists. It's a treat to see a lot of familiar faces here who have their own areas of expertise in agriculture in our three countries. So looking forward to a robust discussion. When Ryan reached out about this panel and thinking about the opportunities for advancing agriculture regionally, my first response was, we do that already. And we've been doing it for a really long time. And we have, through the presence of NAFTA or now USMCA or COSMO or whatever initials you call it by, we really have 30 years of experience in thinking systemically and regionally rather than transactionally. And we shouldn't really take that for granted. And I think we're at a time right now in our discourse around trade where we are talking about a series of bilateral relationships rather than a structural set of regional relationships and what we can do when we think about strengthening those ties among regions. And it's a real opportunity, that thinking regionally, and it's something that I hope that we will continue to invest in. And, I just thought of, so I spent 7 years at the beginning of my career as a negotiator at the U.S. Trade Representative in both the Environment and the Agriculture Office. Went to the Hill for a while, came back as an appointee at USDA, and then as Chief Ag Negotiator at USTR. And throughout that time, Canadians and Mexicans were people on my speed dial, right? And so I just thought I'd share a couple of examples of things where our thinking as regionally both improved our outcomes multilaterally and made us more effective in, protecting and advancing agriculture at home. And so, throughout my time working on things like food safety standards at Codex, our Codex teams often coordinated before big Codex meetings to talk about what our priorities were on the agenda. We've worked together as a region to help prepare and build the capacity of our colleagues throughout Latin America and make sure they too could participate and feel ownership and be ready to apply those food safety standards that are so important to our agricultural exports to the rest of the world. In the New World Wine Group, one of my favorite parts of my portfolio at USTR, to be the wine negotiator. We worked together as our 3 countries and with many other New World wine producers to unify our labeling practices, recognize our winemaking practices in a way that would make us more competitive as a group with Europe, who had different ideas about those practices and labels and the way that they labeled their wine varieties. We've mentioned, biotech approvals and dossiers. We streamlined and harmonized our application procedures, our dossiers, our requirements to make it easier to consider those applications and the science, to share information back and forth, and to reduce the burden on companies submitting. We coordinated before major negotiations. The United States is not a party to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and yet we had very important negotiations for ag trade on the biosafety protocol. And it was negotiations and pre-coordination with our Canadian and Mexican colleagues that helped us be able to share our priorities on the floor. That's a huge service that coordination did for us to make sure that the U.S. viewpoint and expertise was shared. Similarly, coordination before WTO rounds. Some of you are old enough to remember when Doha was alive. We spent a lot of time talking with our Mexican and Canadian counterparts. And so the depth and the breadth of the relationship and the number of issues on which we coordinate so that we can show up in a more effective fashion multilaterally, I think is something we shouldn't take for granted and is worthy of continued investment. But we've also done the same in playing defense and focusing on protecting food safety and animal and plant health, and have long recognized that the United States being in the middle of that North American sandwich, right? We have a long border both with Canada and with Mexico, and so where there are pressures from pest and disease in either of those neighbors, we know we will be the next to feel them too if we don't collaborate. And so I think back to the melamine scare, where we had both pet food and candies and other products coming from China that had been contaminated with melamine that created a huge food safety scare. And we were able to figure out that they were coming in through a port in China and then moving south. And that was at a time where I was at USTR and the NAFTA portfolio was on my desk. And I had 4 or 5 people that I knew I could call immediately in different agencies in Canada and in Mexico to say, what's happening? How can we coordinate? Because we saw it as a joint responsibility to protect the safety of citizens in all 3 of our countries, right? And the coordination was immediate and deep and ongoing until we could get to the root of that problem and develop a coordinated solution. Similarly, it's not just government, it's also industry. Our poultry industries in the US and Mexico worked together to eradicate Newcastle disease in Mexico because we understood that as long as that disease was still present south of the border, it put pest pressure on the US industry. We also, and similar efforts took place with the pork industry between the US and Mexican industries, understanding that having reliable, safe, high quality pork coming from both sides of the industry or poultry grew the market for both and protected the market and the quality for both countries. And so, again, 30 plus years of thinking not as a zero-sum game, but of building opportunity in serving the 3 markets together. And speaking of dispute settlement, which has come up with both previous panelists, I think we owe ourselves a little bit of a pat on the back in that, there are tensions around certain products. There are tensions around the way certain, processes are handled. But because we have used those mechanisms we developed, they have largely stayed in the lane of that product and that tension and not spread to infect the rest of the relationship or to create trade barriers that go beyond those products. And we know these usual suspects. Is it tomatoes? Is it sugar? Is it potatoes? Some of those have been longstanding disputes, but also ones that we have been able to deal with effectively. And I will say there too that I think when it comes to thinking about reviewing USMCA or reviewing the status of our relationship, we often jump to okay, maybe we can make a little progress on Canada dairy or on, potatoes here or there or something. But we rarely take time to reflect on the success of the forest before we start talking about those irritating little trees, right? And I think this is an important time for us to think about how much of the trade that moves north and south from the United States and, among the three countries really moves without impediment and moves in a way that is coordinated and cooperative. I'm a Nebraska farm girl. 10 miles from my farm, I could put the corn or soybeans from my farm on a rail line directly to Mexico to feed the cattle there, right? We have invested in a regional approach, and I think fostering that investment further would really behoove us well. Thinking ahead and not trying to usurp our questions, I think both of the other panelists have reflected on the fact that, one, we are blessed, right? We have a wide variety of ecosystems. We have, among the three of us, a lot of fertile soil and healthy farmland. We have, relative to other regions, an abundance of water, right? And there are areas, of course, that are more stressed than others, but as a region, that is the case. But we also are facing a changing climate where what we produce and where we produce it, even among the three of us, is changing, where the movement of people, the pressure from pests is increasing and changing. And so that coordinated approach to make sure that we remain as competitive and as productive in thinking about those changing pressures, I think would serve us very well and is a place that I hope our three countries can lean into.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rutter. That was great. You brought up the review of USMCA, and I want to get into that in the moderated portion of the discussion a bit. But I want to start with an antecedent set of questions, because it strikes me when looking at the day's programming, a lot of the panels, based on their composition, have a lot of private sector and industry-based participation. What's unique about this panel is we have either formers or current government officials. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the through line of everything is competitiveness today. So I want to ask just a simple, basic question, but one that kind of makes this panel distinct from the others, which is, what does competitiveness mean from the mindset or from the viewpoint of a public sector official as opposed to a private sector official? Because we'll hear a lot from the private sector and industry folks today about what competitiveness means. But from the seats where you all have sat, or where you're currently sitting in Luis Rosendo's case, what does competitiveness mean? Maybe we'll start with you, Francis, and then go to Luis Rosendo, and then go to you, Darcy.
Well, first time I'll say that as a former politician, I would also say I would reflect naturally. I would defer to what are the barriers that industry sees. But to me, when I think about competitiveness, is obviously there has to be some processes that are involved to ensure that protection of the public, security, et cetera, but how do we make it more friendlier for industry and not focused on internal processes that make it harder for industry to operate? And that's from when you ask about competitiveness from a public sector, I think that's how I certainly see it.
Luis Rosendo, from your viewpoint, you're a current government official. How do you think about competitiveness from where you sit?
Oh, I think that competitiveness is very, very important in all our production processes. Is of course one of the key variables. Nevertheless, I think that is very important, this question, because it changed. And right now, prices and competition process are in second place in comparison to economic security. We can be buying with higher prices in our region, but trying to increase the economic security of our region. The main variable today is not necessarily competition or prices. It's much more important that we are producing in our region together, Canada, United States, and Mexico, and trying to have resilience and protection against or facing another kind of pressures or risk. So I think that right now competition and prices is in second place, and in first place is economic security.
Darcy?
Well, I think having been in government for a long time and then sort of in the private sector and thinking about, for the purposes of this panel, what creates the conditions for competitiveness in government, I think 3 words kind of come to mind as where government can invest to unleash that competitiveness of our industry, and that would be preparedness, confidence, and what was my third? I was just thinking of certainty. Mm-hmm. And, I think preparedness, again, the science, the data that can come from government, the investment in capacity to be able to, deal with pest and disease or other pressures, outbreaks that come where, there needs to be a public response, right? So both prevention and then dealing with that. Certainly confidence, if other countries aren't confident in the safety of food coming from, the North American region, that obviously affects competitiveness, right? And as in the years I spent as a trade negotiator, one of the things that customers in other countries would say to me is, we're actually willing to pay a bit of a premium for products from the US or from the region because you deliver things on spec and on time. We have confidence in the food safety system and the plant and animal health system that you have built. And you have an honor for contracts. You have a clear rule of law. I will have standing in your courts if something goes wrong. And that gets to that third item, which is, of course, certainty, is having both consistency and transparency in how we deal with our foreign counterparts on the conditions that they will encounter in doing business with us, importing or exporting. I think all of those things underpin then the opportunity for the private sector to be the most competitive that they can be.
Great, that's terrific. Preparedness, confidence, certainty. For obvious reasons, I think a lot of the focus in the US at least has been on tariffs, but there are also non-tariff issues that I wanted to talk about as well. More so even, because they too affect our competitiveness. So can you talk about some of the non-tariff barriers that are affecting competitiveness in the agricultural industry? In an effort to be forward-looking, where could the 3 countries work together better to reduce some of those non-tariff areas that are say, crimping some of our competitiveness? I'll start with you, Francis.
Yeah. I mean, not to jump on what Darcy said, but I think we do this really well in North America. Obviously, there's some issues where I would say we face more non-trade barriers is with other countries, and especially when we talk about, I don't want to go back to the beaten horse that I talked about, but biotech is with reason, politicians get pressure from the public and they're not certain whether or not biotechnology should play a role in crops and whatnot. But those are key issues that the way we do agriculture in North America is not necessarily true in other countries. So, and that, going back to, it does affect our competitiveness here because we can't necessarily sell our products abroad because those are issues that we face. And I mean, I can mention one issue that Canada continuously faces with Europe is the issue of carcass washing with Europe and an issue of water. But I'll go back to, at the end of the day, is our beef less safe because of that and in North America? And the answer is no. But as a North American bloc, how do we fight that, and how do we promote that particular science-based approach? All policy decisions need to be based on science, and like Codex plays the great role. Obviously, I didn't have the same role as Darcy did over there, but I know how important it is to promote that internationally to ensure that we do develop standards across the globe and ensure that we all play at the same level playing field. And competition is competition, but we need to ensure that those particular non-trade tariff barriers don't impede our ag sector. And we did, I recall doing a study, and in Canada we face about 400 non-tariff trade barriers. 400 non-tariff trade barriers with, and it's not with the U.S. because we're very integrated here, but with other countries. So what I would be saying is that as North Americans, how do we promote the way we do it here and ensure public confidence in other countries? Because I think we've got a good model here.
Thanks. Luis Rosendo, what are you looking at in terms of non-tariff barriers potentially hindering competitiveness in this sector?
Yes, I agree. I think that with zero tariff that we have right now in the USMCA for the agricultural sector, the non-tariff trade is or barriers are very, very relevant, and maybe more than tariffs right now. And I agree that biotechnology issues should be understood and work a little more. I agree totally with Canada. And in Mexico, we need to work harder with our customs processes to strengthen our Mexican system of customs to be more faster and to reduce the transaction cost of all these export-import processes. And also, I think that we need to work more in all the region about the phytosanitary processes. We need to be faster with these processes to reduce all the costs that this implies.
Terrific. Thank you, Luis Rosendo. Darcy?
So again, many excellent points have been made before me, but I think, agriculture is hard, right? Because a lot of those non-tariff barriers are really important for protecting our industry from pest and disease and protecting our citizens. And if we don't do that well, then our producers as well as the foreign suppliers are hurt in the minds of consumers, right? Everyone wants to have strong trust in what's on their grocery store shelf. But identifying that line between what's protecting health and safety and what's just making things a little bit difficult to do business, right? That's a really hard line. And I think what we have done well in some cases with our neighbors north and south is exchange information on our experience trying to get into some of those markets, on being champions for a risk-based and an outcomes-based approach to being able to address health and safety issues rather than a hazard-based approach that we see in other markets that can, or more restrictive policies that are focused on following specific processes rather than achieving specific outcomes when it comes to the level of pest and disease. And so, again, I think we've reinforced the need for that outcomes and that risk-based approach with trading partners over and over, and I think that has been helpful. But there's carcass washing, there's the chlorinated chicken, there are these long tails of woe where we have had pretty sticky barriers that really aren't clear. They're about the science and more about the origin of product that are difficult to work through. And unfortunately, I think that's part of the game in agriculture trade, but the coordination as a region, I think, has helped us overcome some of those.
Let's get to the review of USMCA because it's been brought up a couple times. We're quite focused here at CSIS on the review of USMCA. We're trying to track, the review of USMCA from a number of different industries and angles. Perhaps just a question about what you expect to be kind of the main thrust of the conversation within the agricultural space on the review of USMCA, where you happen to see some opportunities. Maybe you can comment on that. Francis, then Luis Rosendo, and then Darcy.
Yeah, well, if I can say, the elephant in the room for us is always our supply managed sector. Obviously, we get pressure, and market access will be an issue, and it's always an issue as in every negotiation it becomes an issue. And I think, to steal Darcy's words, we should focus on what's working well and how do we improve. And there's always, Canada has certain issues with the US has certain issues with Canada, and Mexico has certain issues with all of us, or vice versa. So I would tend to, let's focus on the key issues. And the USMCA, I mean, a trade agreement that was signed just over 5 years ago, it's not an old trade agreement. It's still very relevant to this day. So for me, it'd be, let's review, but when we have reviews, we also cause uncertainty in the marketplace because we're not sure, and investors await to see what may happen within this trade agreement. So let's continue working on this things that we've really done well, and how do we do that in each of our own countries to ensure that when we talked about non-trade barriers, how do we ensure that we do this efficiently so ag can thrive, industry can thrive, and that's where I think we need to focus. I wouldn't want to rip it up because there's been really good things that have been done. And again, a trade agreement is not necessarily that old when we talk about a modernized trade agreement.
Luis Rosendo, over to you. What are you expecting of the USMCA review with respect to agriculture in particular?
Yes, I am optimistic about the following negotiations. Right now, we have a very, very constructive and positive dialogue with Minister Lutnick and with Ambassador Greer. And we have been talking long hours about not just agriculture, but also manufacturing, and the importance that it is to work with a regional perspective. It's very important to continue working in a regional vision. I think that we did the impossible in the last 30 years, and we multiply our exports to the world by 10 times. And the supply chains that we have, not only in manufacturing, but also in agro, are very, very relevant for our economic growth of the region. So we are optimistic. Right now, Canada and Mexico have a preferential or preferent treatment, especially in agriculture. We have tariff zero, basically. And we will continue working with the United States government to try to strengthen our trade. And we expect that we will have a very good upgrade of the USMCA in the following month.
Terrific. Darcy?
Well, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what to expect
Okay.
in terms of how that review will be structured. But I think I view that review as an opportunity to review and improve. I don't see it as a renegotiation of the fundamentals that I think are working well. But I think it's important to know that, everybody in this room has an opportunity to shape what the modalities are of the conversation that happens between those governments. And so I think it's important that we talk about what's working well, again, the health of the forest, those trees, those items that remain irritants that will likely be on the table, and how we think that we can improve. And when I look at USMCA, what's remarkable to me is not how many new things were added, but how many things were unchanged because NAFTA got them right. But also that, USMCA brought NAFTA into this century, right? And that trade agreements tend to reflect the last agreement in time, right? Who made advances. So, more labor and environment as being integral rather than as side agreements. I think a particularly important part of the USMCA update for our three countries was the focus on SPS measures and the deep coordination on those non-trade barriers we talked about and protecting the health and safety of the region. That was not only bringing us up to date with other more recent trade agreements, but I think has set a new standard for how to look at that in agreements later in time. Are there other places where that's the case? But overall, I feel like the discussion we've had today presents an opportunity for us in the context of that review to formalize how we might coordinate and, as a region, approach those trading partners who may be engaging in unfair trade practices or who may be critical to thinking about regenerative agriculture or climate, either in a positive or a negative way, right? Behaviors we want to, as a region, encourage globally or discourage globally. Can we work into the fabric of our relationship how we're going to do that and make it part of our priorities? So I feel like we're at a point now where we can take sort of our common strategies for global agriculture. Is a time to make those a more formal part of the USMCA discussion and not just our agreements back and forth. But lastly, I will say, if you think about from NAFTA to USMCA to now, we went first, right? We created that regional structure, that trade agreement, and have been building on it ever since. But our partners North and South have been adding more trade agreements and more opportunities to both export their products, but also import products that compete with US products and that are getting more competitive all the time. And so our competitive position versus how we serve the Canadian and the Mexican market has also changed. And I think that's worth looking at and thinking about ways to strengthen North and South to keep us as competitive in the Mexican and the Canadian market as we have been before.
That's a great point. I want to just remind folks in the room, if you have questions, again, you've got the QR code here. We will have time in about 20 minutes or so to move to the Q&A portion. So do input your questions so that we can get to them later. Alternatively, you can go to the website for the conference and click on that green button, Ask Live Questions. Let's get to a question about what has happened since the USMCA agreement has been signed. You mentioned, France, we haven't been that long into this experiment. It's only been 5 years in, but it's long enough to assess whether there have been some changes or continuations from patterns that we observed under NAFTA. And so what I want to do is ask if there have been any notable shifts in production or in export between the three countries that you've noted since the signing and implementation of USMCA.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you look at the hard numbers, and they're very available, but since the signing of USMCA, I think all of our countries' exports have gone up. And just in Canada, yes, we are a small country, but we consume $722 per person of U.S. ag products, and that's an amazing number. And versus the U.S. consumes about $118 per person in the U.S. market size, but it just, to me, the USMCA, again, not that different from NAFTA, but it did bring it into the 21st century. So now that we're in play, the whole gene editing discussion is happening in Canada. We're developing protocols, and our universities are collaborating with U.S. universities and vice versa. I think the demands of a changing climate will it's not the agreement that's going to be the issue. It's how do you maintain public trust as these technologies will get developed much faster. And we haven't even talked about AI, not the disease, but artificial intelligence in the ag space, which is coming fast. And it's going to help develop new tools for farmers. And I think, but understanding that, the majority of our citizens don't live in a rural area and are disconnected from a farm. So how do we communicate to that? And we've talked about the importance of, yes, governments need to protect citizens, but also farmers need to make a living. Farmers back home, we say farmers feed cities. So we need to, as these technologies develop faster and faster, and USMCA has provided that vehicle to do that. So how will we market these particular technologies, and how will we communicate that to the public so we don't lose that public trust? So I think a consequence of the USMCA will be, I think, in the future with AI and biotech that's coming down the pipe, will be amazing. It just, but to me, that's what I'll be looking at in the next 5 years, understanding that the numbers are up and we can all see it, that the benefits of that.
And I see some of our panelists in here for the panel later, which will touch on technology and innovation, so get ready for that. Luis Rosendo, I want to go to you, and I'm mindful of the time. I know that your busy and demanding schedule means you have to leave at 11:30 Washington time, which is 9:30 your time in Mexico City, so I know this will be your last answer. Thank you very much for being with us. What has changed for Mexico since the signing of USMCA in terms of agriculture?
I think that these last 4 years have been very, very important for the agricultural sector. We expand our exports to all the world, mainly to the United States and Canada. And we think that we have a very good agreement. We are seeing, I repeat, that the change for the following years will be concentrate to increase our domestic production. And when I talk about domestic production, I'm talking about regional production. And we have a plan, the Plan Mexico. And in our plan, we would like to increase in a very important extent. Our corn production, for example, will increase from 21 to 25 million tons. Beans, for example, we would like to duplicate our production in our domestic market. Milk, rice, to try to benefit the local and the regional producers, and to continue working as a complement for Canada and for the United States.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Luis Rosendo. If you need to go,
thank you very much.
Yeah, please go ahead and go to your next meeting. Thanks again for being with us.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Darcy, over to you.
Well, I think really I touched on it earlier, which is that as we re-emphasized and deepened our ties through USMCA, the rest of the world did not stop building their competitive advantage in terms of global commodities. So, you know, I'm sharing the stage today with our two largest trading partners, but we've never quite recovered our market share with that third largest, being China, after the original trade war, right, where we lost market share and integration there. At the same time, I think it's hard to say Brazil's an emerging market when it comes to agriculture, since they're the largest exporter of soybeans and maybe of corn. And a number of other countries in fruits and vegetables, look at many of our Latin America partners, they are becoming more efficient, producing higher volumes, higher quality, some of the things that really made the US or North American products stand out. This is a pretty competitive world across a wide variety of products. And that's great in many ways when you think about a population that needs access to affordable, reliable, nutritious food and a variety of it. I'm quite confident in the US's ability and in our region's availability to play in that world. But I think as we think about our integration, we need to make sure that we are looking at it in the context of a world of competitors that aren't standing still.
Yeah, and other types of blocks being formed around common interests.
Absolutely.
I want to ask a question that comes from something that Francis mentioned, which is the disconnect that sometimes people feel from the industry. You mentioned that a lot of folks are in urban areas, they're not necessarily connected, they don't know a farmer, they're not. That was never my case. I was born in Wisconsin. I grew up around a lot of farms. It sounds like Darcy and I had a similar sort of upbringing in an agricultural type of place. But my question is basically around smallholder and family-owned farms, and basically all of these benefits that we're talking about of the integrated North American market. How do we make sure that those farms too, those smallholder and family-oriented operations, also get benefits from everything that we're talking about, removing tariff, non-tariff barriers, science-based policy, and so on?
I'd say it's a challenge with for small farm back home would be you got a lot of veggie producers and whatnot that operate and normally tend to, that's what I would call a small farm, we tend to go to the local market. it's a challenge for them to get into the export business simply because they don't either have the cash flow to do that or the transportation network. So whomever can solve and facilitate that particular issue for them, I think will be key to that, because it always comes back to those particular farmers. They grow the food, and then they sell their own food, and and they're at the market, and they're working 7 days a week, and they normally have another job because it started as a hobby, and then that's the type of small farm that I'm talking about. But in Canada, for instance, and how do we help them? Financing is always the part of the issue. So, so how do we help them get access to financing? And when you're living beside the biggest economy in the world, capital is always an issue. In Canada, I mean, there's never enough capital in Canada. When we tend to compare ourselves to the biggest economy, and it makes a lot of jealous people in Canada sometimes when we're looking for access to capital. But we would have in Canada, for instance, FCC, which helps farmers finance their operations and banks are available as well. We also have an export development corporation that also can secure particular loans in Canada, where I've seen a good model. But then again, I'm talking about a little bit of bigger farms, as our greenhouses and our fruits and veggies sometimes have relationships with their U.S. counterparts, because they'll produce during the summer but import. They don't want to lose that relationship with our retailers, so they'll import during winter times, obviously, from U.S. producers or Mexican producers, to keep that relationship and that steady flow of supply with our retailers. So how do we leverage that, I think, is key. Yeah.
Terrific. Darcy?
That is a really big
How do we make sure folks from parts of the country where we're from benefit from this integrated market?
Again, I think Francis made a good point about just the state of agriculture, right? And what we have seen is significant concentration into larger and larger farms, where you have a small percentage of the farms producing a majority of the output, whether that's in fruits and vegetables or in grains or what have you, but a large number of smaller farmers who then have to try and work through what can be a complicated set of rules to be able to participate in the global markets. And so, again, thinking back to my role as a trade negotiator and encouraging exports, part of my job, as I saw it, was to say, whatever I'm producing in whatever form, is there an opportunity for me to send it with as few barriers to as many places as possible, right? So just increasing that opportunity. But the terms of trade, and when we talk about trade policy, is really kind of dealing with the border. That always has to be paired with the domestic policy to say, how do I help the smallest, the most underserved, the most disadvantaged of those farmers make their way through the paperwork, that understanding, how do we reach them well? And so, USTR, working with USDA, working with state departments of agriculture, helping them think about the variety of ways they might participate in local and regional and global markets is important. And I think increasingly we've talked about climate, we've talked about, big changes in trade policy and how to navigate them. What's hard for smaller producers is managing risk. And when you have greater weather volatility, when you have uncertainty in markets, when you have, competition at scale, putting together logistics is hard if you produce a container full and someone else can fill the ship, right? And so all of those things are sort of, places where strategic public-private partnership, I think, is really important. And a place that I'm concerned now that some of our policies may be de-emphasizing that specific outreach to those smallest farmers. But, it's something as simple of, if you're a farmer, do you have on-farm storage? Can you afford the grain bins? If not, you have to sell at the height of harvest. If you do, you can hold your product and wait until those prices are higher or less volatile and be more, strategic about how you market their grain. All of those things add up to farmer resilience, and I think from the standpoint of the health of our rural communities, our competitiveness overall, that resilience is something that I think is worth investing in.
That's terrific. I want to ask a question as well about the zeitgeist in the U.S., because Darcy, Francis, you both have given us a litany of ways in which we've benefited from the integrated market, a litany of ways in which we work together internationally. Codex was just one of the things that came up in our conversation. Clearly, the movement here, the zeitgeist here, is to reduce the size of government, right? And so we're facing a moment where the world is becoming more complex. We can benefit from acting in an integrated manner even more, but we need to find a way to do more with less, at least here in the US. So maybe start with you, Darcy. Any recommendations you have as to how we can manage to do more in this current moment where clearly the zeitgeist, the winds of time are going to be to reduce the size of the state?
I think part of doing more with less is figuring out what's essential. And I referred a little bit, earlier to what are the things that give industry confidence to meet that government investment, right? So if you think about the quality and availability of big data, for example, NOAA climate and weather modeling, for example, that people rely on both to make decisions about planting, the strength of our crop analysts and the economists at USDA. It's not just US farmers that plan their planting around that. It's farmers around the world who look at our reports on key markets and make decisions about what to plant, when to plant, how to manage their own risk based on that. So I think there are some fundamentals that sort of underpin private sector decision making that are public goods that we need to think about. If we lose them, what are the ripple effects, and do a careful analysis of that. And I think we haven't talked about here, but what I think is an opportunity both for the USMCA review, but also just for future planning, whether in the context of USMCA or not, but climate has come up a number of times. What we can plant as Mexican, US, and Canadian farmers, what will be resilient, how we think about pest disease, water use, all of those things. Even with the resources we have now, which may be streamlined, as you have said, the scientific capacity in our individual countries to think about and to share the data, the modeling, the expectations, the opportunities, we need to team up here. We should be sort of planning, modeling, thinking together about where our sectors are going and what are the biggest challenges we need to correct, but what might be opportunities as we see a changing climate and as we see demand from other markets as well that are affected by these things. So I think, if we're going to streamline what government resources are available, let's think about what is really needed to future-proof a competitive ag sector, and let's lean into those things that government has to underpin so that the private sector can bring their investment on top of it.
That's terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the world is, Canada's going through an election, but I think, without picking a party, I think the issue, we too in Canada feel that we should restrain government spending because pandemic and whatnot, so expenses were high, but so as we start scaling back, we need to ensure that the ag community is well served, and I know there's going to be a panel on technology, but is there a way that we can leverage technology to ensure that if a new technology comes online, well, they have to have a government approval, especially for crop tools. So, for me, what would be important is I don't want a company waiting 3, 4, 5 years because of cost-cutting measures. So we need to ensure that can we leverage technology to make that particular application process more efficient? Because at the end of the day, if a tool is available in another marketplace, then we are putting our farmers at a disadvantage. So we need to find, especially in the ag space, governments are governments, they're the same thing, but Darcy has mentioned it. What are the critical, I would call them critical apps in our government that make the functioning of our ag ecosystem, and how do we ensure that the growth is there, and how do we ensure that the tools are there, and how do we ensure that companies and industry that is applying doesn't have to be waiting for years before a new tool comes online. And I think information sharing is extremely important. Can we develop a process where, if a tool is accepted in Canada, then there's a way that it can shorten the time frame in the US. And I know there's already discussions like this, but can we do more? And I think that would be the ultimate objective in my view, especially when we talk about ag.
Yeah, terrific. So it's about 11:45. I'm going to shift the panel discussion now to the Q&A portion. My CSIS Americas colleague, Juliana Rubio, is in the back, has a microphone and some of the questions that you all have inputted. Just before you read the first question, Juliana, reminder to the audience, you have the QR codes here on the side. You can scan it, ask a question. Again, we're filtering them. Or you can go to the website for the event and click on the Ask Live Questions button. Juliana, our first question.
Thank you. Are you on? Okay. We have a few questions. So I'm going to start with something that Ambassador Vetter noted. She said that building a more competitive agricultural system requires a focus on preparedness, confidence, and certainty. However, communications around agricultural innovation often fail to effectively reach both consumers and regulatory agencies. How can the North American agricultural region strengthen its science-based communication to support competitiveness? And are there successful examples to draw from? And how can we be more innovative in how we communicate?
There's a couple different questions there, if you want to unpack them.
Good question, right? I mean, I think as our agricultural technologies become more sophisticated, and where governments need to be sure that they are both factual and don't oversimplify, because we want the confidence to come from both the scientists in other countries who would need to approve and accept our products, but also build confidence in the general consumer. This has been a vexing issue for North American agriculture, across effectively communicating benefit and risk of these things has been, evaded us, shall we say, for decades, right? And I think it's even more important now that information travels in 10-second videos around the globe, right away. The stuff I see my kids seeing on social media that is just plain wrong about, science, or oversimplified to the point that it misses the concern about cost or benefit. I think it's an area, frankly, that needs some really smart brains, both in science and communication, to focus on, because I do think it's going into the realm of not only reducing competitiveness or leaving important technologies by the wayside because consumers question them, but there's also a danger component, right, when misinformation comes into play. So I don't know that I have the answer, but I share the sense of urgency and importance that the questioner put forward, and I think it's a strategic imperative to think about how we communicate these things better and how we create a series of sort of verified voices that people know who to look to, right? And we don't have that in a number of realms, including in food safety and stuff right now.
I might ask Francis to weigh in on this as well. I mean, you were, until very, very recently, an elected official, and so communications and how constituents see things and consumers is extremely important.
Yeah, can we get rid of social media? I mean, that would solve a lot of the issues. But it's certainly something that we think about even back home. We do a great job between the ag community at talking to the ag community, but we do a terrible job at getting an audience in the cities, and I would say that's where sometimes the pressures come from. And I mean, I can talk about animal agriculture, that, some people in cities believe that all farmers, mistreat their animals, and we constantly fight this back in Canada, but it's true everywhere. So from a comms perspective is how can we, and it's hard because, I don't have an issue back home if I put a press release out, the ag media will pick it up, but they don't communicate to the cities. So how do we get in the broader media and the mass media to communicate the message? And I would say also that scientists are afraid to speak out sometimes because they will get on social media. I mean, they'll get harassed to the point where they won't speak anymore. And that I find that it's a terrible thing. But I think as a collective, we need to we need to ensure that, and that's why I said get rid of social media. But it's not a place where we can have an adult conversation, unfortunately, and I don't necessarily have an answer on how to do that. I mean, I look at my Canadian colleagues, we constantly beat our heads on how do we communicate to an audience that is disconnected from farming. Sticking to facts, I think, is important. Governments need to probably play a bigger role, but there's also a distrust in governments. So where do we build those third-party allies that can communicate to that particular audience? And I say this as a politician, politicians react to their constituency. So I often I used to communicate with my urban colleagues to say, yeah, this is not really an issue, this is not how it's done. But that's my small part, but others, we need governments, industry, and third party working together to provide that public trust so we don't face pressure and disinformation or misinformation out there in the public space.
Terrific. Next question, Juliana.
You have spoken about the challenges posed by non-tariff barriers that arise from well-intentioned efforts to protect health and safety. How important are capacity building efforts both in North America and internationally for ensuring that new measures are science and risk-based and do not unnecessarily impede trade? What more can be done in this space?
Both of you would probably like to comment on that.
I mean, it goes back to what I was what we were just talking about. I mean, organizations like Codex are extremely important, but if I go to New York City and talk about Codex, I don't think nobody would know. Or if I go to Toronto City, I don't think anybody understands what Codex does. So even from communications is going to become even more important. And I don't, I talked about Europe. I don't necessarily blame Europe. It's just the politicians down there are reacting to their constituency. So it's promoting, I want to go back to the previous point because it's so important because it has an impact on those particular issues that sometimes we face, and countries sometimes will implement some non-trade barriers even though they signed an agreement to protect, and there's sometimes this happens, but I would say the majority are based on policy decision makers reacting to their particular constituency. So communications would be the important key here.
Yeah, I mean, I think capacity building is absolutely critical, both participation and ability to shape the Codex agenda by countries. Some of them don't have capacity to go to the meetings or to fully participate or help to be part of the scientific review. We want all countries to feel like they own and understand how we got to that standard so that they can explain it and apply it in their countries and allow product to move. But, again, going to a meeting saying we have to support Codex. I remember telling a friend when I was going to my first Codex meetings, probably 20 years ago, that I was going to a meeting of the Codex Alimentarius, and his response was, is that like the Da Vinci Code? Like, what is that thing? It is definitely kind of a language all its own. But I think let's also remember that those countries that have limited capacity, I remember meeting with an African official in Codex who was widely respected in that community of food safety scientists, but he was like, I am one of 5. Like, there are 5 of us who make decisions about whether products and new uses of vet drugs or additives or whatever are safe for everything that comes through our port. So we can't really do our own risk assessment. We have to rely on Codex, and if we see, new things, your first response is no until you can prove that yes is okay. So you sometimes end up with rules that are much more onerous or much more broadly applied than they need to be because you don't want to be the person that was too loose with your, the rules, and you put your people's health in danger. Like, they're doing their job. Now, are all rules that are more broadly applied or licensing procedures that are more onerous than they need to do, is that always about health and safety? Not always, but it's easier to tell the difference if you have people with sufficient capacity on the other end, right? And you can have that conversation, and they have, time and ability and support to make decisions in the way that we hope they would make them.
Excellent. Juliana?
What will coordination among the three countries look like in tackling foreign animal disease, crop protection, and sustainable farming, especially given the current scientific and political landscape? How can the scientific community continue to collaborate effectively to protect both the public and agricultural systems in all three countries?
Okay, that's two different questions,
Yep.
basically.
Do you want me to go first?
ahead,
Yeah,
Francis.
I see the chair of the pork producers back home, and I do want to talk about one specific example of where the collaboration between our three countries is working extremely well when we talk about African swine flu. And we were able to get an agreement with specific zones so the border doesn't shut down. And I think that's the future of animal disease and how we treat that. And obviously, and that's not a political statement, but diseases don't know any borders. But it's the reality, and how that collaboration is key amongst our officials who deal with that, and preparing industry to and our producers, because the stress that they face. At the end of the day, when we do talk about AI, I've certainly see some poultry farmers back home. They don't want to see their what they've worked so hard gone, and their depopulation happens in their barn, and that's extremely stressful. And by the time you restart, it's 8 to 12 months. So getting this right as a country, as governments, and that collaboration is key to doing that. But again, what Darcy mentioned, we're lucky here that we do have a strong scientific and strong officials, and that capacity is here. But Darcy was right. I would say, in how do we help other countries that don't have necessarily the same means build that capacity? And I think that's where we would need to go.
So I think we already have a lot of existing infrastructure, whether that's, the SPS committee as part of USMCA, or, other opportunities, avenues, committees for sharing scientific information. But I think we probably need to do a better job of integrating the private sector into that, and to finding ways that they can participate that are transparent and don't create even the appearance of the conflict of interest around that monitoring, right? But there's amazing scientific capacity within our trade associations. The pork producers have their own scientists that are looking at, pest disease, how to control them, creating protocols. Private sector moving product back and forth. Are they seeing a little more harassment, some extra questions at the border? There's usually a reason for that, right? There's either suspicion of disease, or there's been greater detection, and they might not know why they're being asked the question. But if there is that constant communication back and forth, sometimes we can figure out where to put those coordination resources, that information sharing, be more efficient with it. When I was at USDA, every time we went to speak, I would say, I'm just going to give you my plea for data, right? Is if you're seeing something that's not working the way it used to, in the way that you're moving product across borders, tell us, because it's probably the case you're not alone, right? And there's probably a reason. Either there's a policy coming, there's a concern about practices, disease, whatever it is, and you start to see it with just some added questions, some stickiness for the private sector. How can we anticipate that? How can we proactively get that information where the private sector may be seeing presence of disease in the field, maybe seeing a decline in quality of what they're getting? Like, what does it mean? And how do we respond to it to protect our agricultural production and competitiveness?
Terrific. Juliana, I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Okay, so the hard one will be the last
Great.
one. How do you expect the current tariff upheaval to shift to a discussion about the USMCA 6-year review?
It's question period, right? Not answer period.
Right.
We really stayed away from tariffs
Yeah.
for much of the conversation. We talked about non-tariff barriers. Tariffs have entered at the very, very end.
Can I let the politicians decide that? Listen, I don't necessarily have an answer, but we owe it to our ag producers to get this right. And I would just say that, you know, uncertainty is bad for economics. And again, I'm not finger pointing, but we need to make sure we get this right and create certainty in the marketplace. Otherwise, we're penalizing our own ag producers, and I don't think that's productive for any of us amongst the key allies.
Yeah, I mean, I think the past few weeks have shown us that what the tariff upheaval or the actual state of trade policy will be might be completely different by the time we start the USMCA review. And that lack of certainty is, you know, delaying investment decisions, is, you know, companies are holding on to cash because they're not sure what they're going to have to put up in bond, you know. So I think it is, the uncertainty is driving a much more short-term kind of fight or flight decisions in business decision making. And what we want in this USMCA review is some creativity about the future state, right? Mm-hmm. And so it is my hope that we have a clearer trade policy, a more consistent one, and one where the goals of any changes that have been made are clear. So at least we're all starting from the same set of sort of intentions and facts and understanding of what the state may be a few months from now, so that we can be having the best mindset for a future-oriented conversation about the region.
Great. I want to close with maybe about 30 seconds or so of reflection from each one of you on what we discussed today, and maybe, you know, one takeaway for folks in the room on the competitiveness through line of today's conference.
Well, first off, I think we owe it to you and to CSIS for hosting this, but I'm happy to see that both Canadians, Americans, and Mexicans are all in this room together, and I think fostering those networks. Politicians are politicians, and I'm the only one who can say that, but let the politicians be the politicians, but foster those networks and certainly advocate for, continue advocating for the ag community. And I certainly appreciate having been here and sharing a stage with an American colleague who I know has a lot more experience in trade negotiations than I do. I've lived it. I've faced farmers with trade negotiations, but I want to say thank you to all of you, and thank you to Darcy, and I think this was a fruitful discussion.
Well, I would echo the thanks. I think it's been a good conversation and a good opportunity for, you know, experts to reflect on where we are and where we could go, right? And I think you saw a lot of agreement around areas where we can continue to invest as a region, right? And you know, really, I think the comments that I just previously made is that, you know, trade agreements don't see their full effect, right, until those tariffs start phasing out, until the committees and structures that we create for dialogue, you know, really those relationships start to solidify, right? And so I think my concern, but also the hope and opportunity, is that when we look at this review, we say, wow, you know, look at how different we are 30 years hence. Yeah. We are integrated. It would be incredibly costly and create a lot more uncertainty if we were to try to disrupt that integration of our transport and infrastructure systems, of our, you know, trading systems, of the back and forth that our agricultural products already enjoy and take for granted, right? But we also live in this really sort of complicated world where each of us has strong export interests offensively and concerns about practices defensively. Can we line those up and use our imagination to say, how would we show up as a region? So that, you know, really is my hope, that we keep that creativity hat on as these conversations go forward.
Thank you very much, Darcy. It's now noon, I've noted. We have, apropos for an agriculture conference, plenty of food in the buffet there in the atrium. Just a quick note to say, you can bring the food in here. Please eat at the table. Obviously, the tables have the skirts on them. This is meant to be an opportunity for you to network, meet other people, hopefully see old friends. And then again, we're going to reconvene at 1:30. Before we break for lunch, please join me in giving a huge round of applause for our three panelists. Francis Druin, Ambassador Darcy Vetter, and of course, Luis Rosendo Gutierrez Romano. Thank you very much.
Thank you.